How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you guys some updates on how the Corvette rebuild is coming along in regards to the subframe and the harmonic balancer replacement and all the little things that I've been having to do to get the car situated and slowly put back together. But especially I've run into some headaches recently with the exhaust manifold studs. So those that have worked on the exhaust system side of a car before probably know where I'm going with this. So a lot of stock exhaust systems on cars are made from mild steel, and over time with age and use, those pieces of the exhaust system will start to slowly rust over time, regardless of if the car is living in California or if it's living in, Missouri, where they salt the roads and there's a lot of rain all the time. But mild steel is just going to slowly rust over time. This car lived its past life in Montana, and while it doesn't have any major rust issues on the frame or any other major components, the exhaust system definitely has some rust to it on the manifolds and a little bit of the mid-pipe and a lot of the hardware pieces. And so as some of you know, to replace the harmonic balancer on this car, I had to drop the mid-pipe of the exhaust system, remove the starter, and install a flywheel lockout tool. And in the process of dropping the mid-pipe off of the car, I found that a lot of these stock exhaust manifold studs were either bent or the threads were kind of boogered up from who knows what happened in the past. So I thought it was a good idea while I'm in there, and that's the moral of the story of how this project is going, is while you're in there, might as well do X, Y, or Z things. So it's taking a little bit longer than I anticipated. But so I ran into some issues with the exhaust manifold studs. Well, firstly, we ran into some issues because one or two of them were bent, so it was actually hard to pull the triangular flange off of the down or the manifold or header to drop the mid-pipe of the exhaust system. So we had to really finagle it out there, and when I say we, I mean my friend Zach and I, who's been in some of my past videos. So definitely that led me to want to replace these exhaust manifold studs. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with what I mean by exhaust manifold studs, I'm not talking about where the exhaust manifold or header or collector or whatever you want to call it mounts to the head of the engine. I'm talking about where the mid-pipe of the exhaust then connects up with that to, run the rest of the exhaust out the back of the car. So how the factory does it, at least for Corvettes, and I'm assuming a lot of other cars, is they use a stud style system instead of like a nut and bolt, because I think it's easier to do that when the car is going down the assembly line. So what you got here, so this is kind of like a standard looking exhaust manifold stud. So you have this little tiny, I'm trying to back it against my hand here, so this little tiny threaded piece right here, that actually threads into the exhaust manifold or header, and then here you have this kind of, it's a flange nut that's actually welded or cast into the stud itself. So this is the direction of the header, and then this is what you're seeing with the exhaust and everything. And then the two flanges that kind of clamp the exhaust to the header then slide up here, and then there's a nut that you thread on here, and then that holds the mid-pipe onto the downpipe or exhaust header of the car. So it's kind of hard to tell, but this was one of the ones that was very slightly bent, just bent enough to where pulling that triangular flange down off of the collector or header, it kind of got stuck. So we had to kind of jiggle it back and forth multiple times. Finally we got it off, so it ended up not being a problem, at least on that end. But that then put that in my mind of like, okay, I need to replace these because, I think we boogered up the threads when we were trying to yank the flange off, even more so than they already were. And I mean, you can see this is just one of what I'll show you of the many others. And you see how rusted that is. So it's going to make threading stuff back on there really difficult. So after I replaced the harmonic balancer and I'm slowly getting to other things, this is where I ran into some problems. So I wanted to obviously remove these out of the exhaust manifolds, and to do that, normally you would just use this little end here. There's a hex end on the stud, and I believe it's like a 7mm hex socket connection. Not very big. So that's kind of like how you try and then turn these off and break them loose from out of the exhaust manifold. Well, no matter what I did, these were so stuck in there, these were like basically rust welded to the exhaust manifold, that I rounded off every single one of these little hex ends to the exhaust studs. And moral of the story is why I'm telling you about this is because, this car I'm sure isn't the only car that uses exhaust manifold studs like this. So if you run into a problem like this, regardless of if you have a Corvette or whatever other car, the solution that I use to get all these out might help you a lot and work well, because they definitely work for me. So with that being said, so with all of these basically rounded off, the next solution was to back two nuts onto each other on the threaded part of the stud that was exposed, and then try and use the upper nut to then pull this out. So this is kind of what I'm talking about here. So this is an M10 by 1.5 exhaust stud, so I went to the store and got two nuts, you know, put one wrench on this one, put one wrench on the top one, squeeze them with two wrenches as hard as I could to back them onto each other, and then try to use the top nut to then, you know, with this, the bottom nut supporting it, to break this loose out of the threads on the exhaust manifold. And this was no luck. I did not, normally I've had luck using the double nut kind of back off method technique in the past, but these were so stuck in there from rust and just heat cycling and whatnot, that the two nuts just kept backing off together, and then that inherently messed up the threads even more. So I tried this method for a while, and this method with the double nuts and everything included me also getting my propane torch out and torching the head, the head, not the bolt, because you don't want this to expand. You want the head that this threads into to expand as much as you can for a long time. And I will also say, to preface this, that I probably doused each of the 6 exhaust studs in liquid wrench for weeks leading up to when I tried to replace these. So tried the penetrating lubricant to break it loose. That didn't work. I tried heat for several minutes. I blew through all my propane in my torch to heat up the exhaust manifold to hopefully use heat to then back these out. The nuts still backed off of each other. So moral of the story is I was having no luck trying to get these off. And eventually, on a few of them, the double nut technique actually ended up splitting the exhaust stud into 2 pieces. So at first, I was torquing this, it bent it down, and then it just went snap. And so this little piece here was stuck in the upper end of the exhaust manifold. And this is the part where I started to get really frustrated, because, you know, I question, when you work on a car, you really learn about all these little nuances that you're like, why would they design it like that, or why would they do that? Because it just makes trying to work on the car that much harder. And you know, I'm an engineer by trade for my full-time day job, so I understand that there's limitations, but sometimes I just question, like, anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. But so what I ran into then was this little piece was stuck in the exhaust manifold, and as you can see, it's a flange nut with the flange facing down towards the end of the exhaust stud that I rounded off and broke off. And the tricky thing was with this thing being threaded all the way into the exhaust manifold, you know, you couldn't actually get a wrench thin enough in there to grab onto this nut here. I would have had to found a wrench that was the right size. I think it was like a 14 millimeter, and then I would have actually had to grind the wrench down so that it was a thinner profile so that I could fit that in there, because no wrenches that I had would actually fit in there to get on that. And even with that, I don't even know if I would have got this off. By now you guys are probably wondering, dude, how did you get these off? Just tell us already. Alright, so after I snapped this one off, I was like, well, my only other option here, couldn't get a wrench on there. I didn't really want to sacrifice a wrench of mine to grind it down. I guess I could have ran to Harbor Freight, got a cheap set of wrenches and done that, but you know, that would have been maybe plan B if this, or plan C, I guess. So what I ended up doing is I got my Dremel tool in there and started cutting this off to give me a nice clean surface. And it's kind of hard to see, but there is a punch tool mark right in the center of that. And I was just going to drill this sucker right out of the exhaust manifold. And if I screwed up the threads, I was going to either re-tap it or just use a pass-through bolt when I connected up the exhaust when I was getting close to being done. Well, so I went through, fully cut this off, and then I had this kind of thought. I was like, you know what? I have one more tool that has saved me in the past that a lot of people love to use, and that is a set of wonderful vice grips. So I tell you, if you don't have a quality set of vice grips in your toolbox in your garage at home, you're missing out, because these have saved me in the past and they save me this time. You definitely don't want to use them on stuff you're worried about putting back on the car. I obviously knew that these were going in the trash, so I didn't care about, you know, boogering these up with the teeth on the vice grips here. So fair warning with that. But get yourself a good set of vice grips. These are actually these are the actual vice grip brand of vice grips, not like the cheap knockoff ones. So get a good quality set of these. So basically what I did was, with this little piece being stuck in the exhaust manifold, I cranked these as hard as I could on this little flange here on the nut, and cranked this and just locked this in. Got a rubber mallet here and just started whacking this, and then broke it loose. And who would have thought? When I gripped these on there and then whacked it with the mallet and realized that it actually broke it loose and it was turning, and at that point I could just spin it out by hand. I was so relieved, because I'm sure trying to drill these things out with a drill bit was not going to be fun. It's an awkward position underneath the car as well, so I'm just really glad that this works. So if you guys are dealing with really rusted, basically rust welded exhaust manifold studs or any other type of hardware that you're not worried about saving, clamp these suckers on there and give it a solid whack with a mallet, and usually that'll break it loose. Like I said, I tried heat, I tried the double nut technique, I tried penetrating oil or lubricant. None of that stuff worked, and then I did this on this one, and then all 5 others came out no problem as well. So here are 5 of the 6. I don't know what happened to the 6th one, but these are the 5 ones that I had left of the really rust welded, stuck, just gross exhaust manifold studs. And you can see on a lot of these that these are just, it's just rounded off the hex end on there. This one broke into pieces here, so this snapped off, and then this was a little piece I cut off from what was remaining on it after this broke off. This one still didn't come off, but I tell you, I gripped the vice grips on this little flange here, the nut, and I whacked it with the mallet. Came off no problem. So definitely use this technique if you're running into issues with stuck exhaust manifold studs and you want to replace them. So to replace these, I'm not going to be actually putting in replacement studs, because I don't really like this design, because it doesn't really give you a lot of good options to get these out if that happens again. Like I said, you can't get a nut or a wrench onto this side of the nut because this flange is in the way, and then the exhaust manifold is obviously on this side. So not really the greatest design, I guess. So I'm just going to be replacing them with just straight up flange bolts that just go up through the bottom, and I just thread them in that way. And that way, if I ever need to take these out, I got a nice big hex end here that I can use to break it loose. Important note that I learned is that when you're getting hardware that is going to get heat cycled, and this is probably one of the hottest parts of the exhaust right here, you're not going to want to get stainless. Something about stainless is with the heat, it'll literally weld itself. So this is just a standard, steel bolt with like a galvanized or zinc coating on it, so that will hold up better and not give you more headaches. Because I always wondered, why do they not use stainless steel hardware? And I guess there is a reason for it. So I got this from my local hardware store that sells a myriad of different shapes and size bolts and nuts and everything. So when I had some downtime, I went through and I literally just thought from where the car's at now to basically almost all the way done, what are all the things that I need to do. So this is my list here. Don't look at this list over here. That's for general to-dos and YouTube video stuff. But this is for this part of the build right now. So you can see it's quite the beast of a list. All the pieces up to this point are checked off. So now it's just here and then down on this side as well. So the 2 things that I did today was I removed the flywheel lockout tool used for installing the new harmonic balancer. I got a new AC Delco starter just because of, while you're in there, just might as well get a new one. The old one wasn't giving me any problems, but it was pretty old and dirty, and just who knows, when that thing would go out. So got a brand new one in there. It was like 140 bucks. I got my new bolts for the exhaust manifold, and then the other thing was I chased the exhaust manifold threads because that's one thing with those rusty threads on the exhaust manifold. Definitely want to try and clean those up as best I could before I installed the new bolts, just so there was no chance of cross-threading or just getting things boogered up from rust or other debris sitting in there. Going down here, you can see the nice shiny new starter sitting up there. So we got that all nice and installed. Trying to get those wires on the starter, the ground and then the hot wire for the starter was definitely a challenge. And you'll notice here I've got a paper towel zip tied to the the mid pipe of the exhaust was because when I was putting the little tiny nut on the ground wire for the starter, I dropped it and it went inside the exhaust. So I kind of freaked out for a second, and then I used the magnetic end of my flashlight and just stuck it down in there, and thankfully it grabbed the nut. But I didn't want that to happen again, so I zip tied a paper towel over it to block that off. So today is Super Bowl Sunday, so I'm going to be going over to family's house and watching the game. So I'm not going to be doing too much else today, but I've got a few days off from work coming up over the next few weekends. So my plan is to definitely start getting really close to getting this thing all wrapped up and back together. I got to drop the subframe out one more time because you have to install the steering rack and a few other things before that goes up into the car, and this one's just kind of temporarily installed so I don't have to use the crane to continuously support the engine and whatnot. So hopefully everything will start really coming together on this car, and then I can get this thing off of the quick jacks, because this has literally been on the quick jacks since before Thanksgiving, because that was when I started on the harmonic balancer, found the crack in the subframe there, and realized I needed to do much more than just replace the harmonic balancer. So I'm itching to drive this car again. I was just at a Cars and Coffee yesterday, so I'm really excited to, you know, definitely bring this thing out once I can get it driving and mechanically solid. Because after this whole ordeal with the subframe and harmonic balancer is done, I will then be moving on to either installing my new Billy Boat exhaust system back there, installing my MGW short throw shifter, or I'll be doing the cosmetic work on the bumper here. I found the exact 3M panel bond adhesive or kind of repair epoxy that I need to use that works well with this type of thermoset resin style bumper. So there's a kind of 3M adhesive you use for the back side where you're not worried about sanding it smooth, and there's a 3M adhesive you use for the front side where you obviously want to get the finish nice and smooth. And then we'll be throwing a coat of Duplicolor color matched torch red paint on the bumper. And then of course after that, we got to get rid of the Ronald McDonald paint scheme. So this is going to be either vinyl wrapped black or I'm going to paint it black. So lots of things going on with the Corvette. Definitely I'm itching to get done with this kind of part of the project because from here, once I get the car sorted, mechanically sorted and sound, is going to allow me to start doing a lot more fun stuff, especially related to my 3D printers over there and 3D printing some really sick parts for this car. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and checking out the video today. I hope you guys enjoyed it and are enjoying following along on my C5 Corvette build journey here. It's definitely a very involved but a very fun, and it will be a rewarding project. One of the things that, it's kind of a silly little thing, but you know, when you've got like a big task to do where you probably put it off for a while, so one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing was when I bought the ATI super damper pulley, the harmonic balancer, it came with a few stickers. And if you guys can see my cabinets up in the back of the garage there, I'm kind of slowly starting to sticker bomb those. So I'm waiting for the day when this car is running back on the ground on its all four wheels where I can put that sticker up on the cabinet, and that'll signify that this part of the build is done. So slowly getting there, piece by piece. So if you guys have any comments or questions about the build, please feel free to leave them in the section below, and I'll be happy to talk to you guys or answer any questions you have. So thanks again so much guys for watching today. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe for a lot more Corvette 3D printing content to come. If you guys don't already know, I do a 3D printing podcast, so if you guys are interested in learning about 3D printing, if you don't have any background at all, or if you do and you want to learn a little more, one of my best friends, Will, from when I was in college at UC Irvine, him and I do a 3D printing podcast together. So a link for that will be in the description below. So thanks again guys, have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.